89 days. Tens of thousands of leads in Tucson, and still no official suspect. In behavioral analysis by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, we do not start with a name, but with the logic of the scene. Instead of following emotions, look at each choice. Why would an 84-year-old woman who depends on a walking cane disappear from a safe neighborhood without leaving any physical trace? In this video, you will see how behavioral experts from the Federal Bureau of Investigation approach a case through data and patterns, not guesses. Why the motive might not be what the public is imagining, and how a small detail hidden in the timeline and the gaps in data could change the way you see the entire story. This is an educational analysis based on public information, and it does not accuse any individual. You will be guided through each layer of facts, clearly, carefully checked, and placed in a logical context. Before going deeper, it is important to say this clearly. This is an analysis based on public information and common behavioral investigation methods often mentioned in Federal Bureau of Investigation materials. The goal is to help you understand how facts are read and placed into context, not to accuse or point to any individual. This video does not replace official conclusions from investigators. Every idea here stays within the limits of confirmed information, without going beyond what is known. Think of this as a careful approach that focuses on logic rather than emotion. Let us start in Tucson, Arizona. An 84-year-old woman disappears from her apartment in a quiet retirement community. Police find Nancy's car left on a remote road. Inside the home, her phone and her walking cane are still there. For someone at her age with weak health, traveling a long distance without support is almost impossible. Do not let the simple scene in Tucson mislead you. A woman who needs a cane to walk yet disappears without a trace creates a physical contradiction. This is not just about someone wandering off. It suggests control over the scene. Whoever is behind this may be creating what we can call a logic disturbance, pushing us to search for a lost person in the desert, while the real situation may have been decided before she even stepped outside. When a scene looks too clean and physical contradictions appear, experts from the Federal Bureau of Investigation often shift toward the idea of staging. If she did not leave on her own, then who took her? And why would they want us to look at the desert instead of looking at the closest relationships? The content in this video is for informational and reference purposes only. Although it has been cross-referenced with reputable sources, some details may have changed or may not be entirely accurate. What happened in the time between when she left the apartment and when the car was found? For FBI experts, this is not a random disappearance. It is a chain of actions that may involve outside influence or an unusual psychological state that must be understood through her earlier routine. What is missing in the timeline? And what does not match when the facts are placed side by side? Those gaps are not weaknesses. They are data. They are where behavioral patterns begin to form. And sometimes what stays silent says more than any statement. The core formula is simple: how plus why equals who. How Nancy left the house and why the car stopped where it did will help shape the profile of the person involved. A scene does not just record events. It reflects choices. A clean scene like her apartment does not mean there is no data. It suggests controlled interaction or an unusual level of familiarity with the environment. The way the victim was approached, the timing, the pace of events, and what happened before and after all can reveal behavioral signals. There is no need for a name right away. What matters is the pattern. Was there preparation? Was there familiarity with the environment? Did the actions follow a clear goal? Or were they driven by a psychological need? The key point is this: these elements are not used to accuse anyone, but to understand how behavior is formed and repeated. When details are placed together, a picture begins to appear. Not a picture of identity, but of behavior. And often, the most important part is not what is clearly visible, but how the details connect through a certain logic. A logic that can guide analysis, but still needs confirmation from official facts. Instead of signals about money or technology, we are dealing with another type of data here: a social network. For someone who is 84 years old, every interaction, even the smallest one with a neighbor, a caregiver, or even a stranger, becomes a piece of the puzzle. The question is not who wants money, but who had access, and the ability to influence the routine of someone with a fixed daily pattern. For experts at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, financial signals are not always at the center. In many cases, they appear later as a layer that can complicate the picture. It could be used to create pressure to shift attention, or simply to take advantage of a situation already happening. It is important to say this clearly. This detail alone does not confirm anything, but when placed next to the timeline and other facts, it opens a more careful way of thinking, that the motive could have multiple layers and may not be only about money. What matters is how these signals appear and interact with the rest of the story. At this stage, some behavioral experts begin to expand their view, but very carefully. If financial motives are not central, then more personal motives may exist. In cases involving older individuals, the motive is often not strong hatred or large financial gain. It is often about control, intentional neglect, or a sudden conflict in a private space. A scene that shows no disturbance can mean the victim trusted the person, or that the person in control acted very calmly. Based on approaches often mentioned in Federal Bureau of Investigation materials, these types of motives rarely appear suddenly. They leave traces over time, not at the scene, but in earlier interactions. It could be communication history, small changes in behavior, or scattered signals that seem unrelated but repeat. So in sensitive cases like this, the answer, if it exists, may not be in the moment the event happened, but in what happened long before. And connecting small details in a careful and verified way is the key to understanding the full picture without rushing to conclusions. One of the most misunderstood points is this: the public not seeing progress does not mean there is no progress. In many cases, what is shared publicly is only a small part of the full picture. The rest, the critical details, are kept on purpose. According to methods often mentioned in Federal Bureau of Investigation materials, the silence from investigators in Tucson can be a strategy. Keeping details about the car or the last calls private is not to hide failure. It protects what is called guilty knowledge details that only the person involved would know. The less information is public, the more any future leak becomes strong evidence. When a lead appears, it needs time to be verified. If shared too early, it can be misunderstood, distorted, or send the analysis in the wrong direction. Limiting information also helps prevent people involved from changing their behavior, and most importantly, keeps the data unchanged for objective evaluation. That is why silence can be part of the strategy. So the question may not be, why is there no answer yet, but what details are being held back, and how will they change our understanding when they are confirmed? In this type of analysis, the focus is not on telling a complete story, but on recognizing behavior patterns. With approaches often mentioned in Federal Bureau of Investigation materials, each small detail can carry more value than it seems. Not every detail stands out, but when placed correctly in the timeline, it starts to create meaning. A simple action, a short missing time, a choice made at a specific moment. On their own, they may not mean much, but together they form a structure, an internal logic of behavior. With someone like Nancy, the motive is rarely about complex financial reasons. It often leaks through earlier interactions, a small change in routine, a stranger appearing too often, or help that feels slightly too much. After nearly 90 days, the question is no longer, where did Nancy go, but who made it possible for her to go that far? Which direction do you lean toward? A sudden medical or psychological event that led to her leaving on her own. Or B, involvement and coordination from someone familiar. Choose A or B, and add one short reason based on what feels logical from the timeline and facts. No need to guess too far. No need to accuse anyone. Just how you read the details. I will read and summarize the most logical views in the next part to see how the community understands this case. After nearly 90 days, this is still not a story with an ending. It is still being read layer by layer, detail by detail, gap by gap in the timeline. Not through words, but through what remains. Facts that do not match, motives that are unclear, questions without official answers. An approach is often mentioned in Federal Bureau of Investigation analysis. What matters most is not always what is revealed, but what is still being held back. And maybe the final question is not what happened, but whether we are seeing the true nature of the case or only touching its surface.